First up, well, it's a landslide victory for pro-democracy lawmakers in the Hong Kong District Council elections, which is being seen as a de facto referendum on the city's Beijing-backed government. But China says no matter what the outcome is, Hong Kong will always remain its part. Pro-democracy, the camp has gained a majority in 17 of the 18 districts. It has won 390 of the total 452 seats. The results are being attributed to young voters who participated in the anti-government protests. The development sends a strong message to China and the city's chief executive, Carrie Lam, as the pro-establishment camp movement. The pro-democracy movement won't stop at the local polls and will surge ahead.
District Council election is already the de facto referendum to prove how Hong Kong people deserve free election, when more than 70 or almost 80% of people vote in an election. Why can't Hong Kong people get back the right to elect our government? We are not satisfied with only elect the district councillors.
And that the city will always remain a Chinese territory.
"止暴制乱，恢复秩序，是香港当前最紧迫的任务。香港是中国的香港，香港事务纯属中国内政。中国政府维护国家主权、安全、发展利益的决心坚定不移，贯彻一国两制方针的决心坚定不移。"
Well, Beijing also said that it supports Hong Kong's chief executive Carrie Lam's leadership for Hong Kong. And in a
你应该知道，我们的立场很明确，就是中国中央政府坚定支持林郑月娥行政长官带领特区政府依法施政，坚定支持特区的警方止暴制乱、恢复秩序，也坚定支持香港的司法机关依法惩处有关的暴力犯罪行为。
In a statement released online, Carrie Lam has said that the government respected the verdict and will seriously reflect on the results. Lam also noted that the results pointed to the people's dissatisfaction with the current situation and the deep-seated problems in society. There are local polls and do not impact Lam's position, but they have certainly undermined her government's authority. These are also the first polls to be held in Hong Kong since protests broke out in June. Now, soon after winning the elections, the newly elected lawmakers entered the Polytechnic University, where a group of protesters are still holed up. The visit came after mediators, including teachers, social workers and lawyers, cleaned the campus on Saturday to find and persuade protesters to leave. The campus occupation by protesters followed fiery clashes with the police in the latest bout of unrest. And while joining us now to talk a little bit more about the situation in Hong Kong is Ho Kilpatrick, who is a journalist and special correspondent for the LA Times and Washington Post, who's joining us live now. Thanks very much, Ryan, for talking to us this evening. Now, your first thoughts on what's happened in Hong Kong. Certainly a major rebuke for Carrie Lam. Now, we've heard Lam say she will reflect on the results, but she's certainly still beholden to her bosses in Beijing, who say the result doesn't change anything.
Yeah, as you say, it was an historic day in Hong Kong. Not only was it the first time that we saw all district council seats open to competition, but it also produced the high voter turnout at over 70%. As you heard earlier, about 80% of these seats, 390 out of 452, went to a pro-democracy camp. So, interpreting this as a de facto referendum on the democracy movement, the verdict is very clear. However, in Carrie Lam's statement this morning, she still seems to be slightly in denial about what the implications are, saying that the landslide victory for Democrats presents sort of a generic rejection of the state of Hong Kong rather than her government in particular. So the responses from her and from state media in Beijing have been somewhat deafening in their silence. It seems as though they weren't prepared at all for this outcome.
Right. And of course, the theory was that, as protests became more and more disruptive and violent, they would alienate many moderates to the government's benefit. But that certainly didn't happen either. The protests galvanized voters to come out and support pro-democracy activists and candidates.
Yes, over the past 5 months now, since this protest movement began, the government has consistently harped on about a so-called silent majority, a majority of Hong Kongers who, despite not being very vocal or coming to protest in the streets, opposed the protest actions because they wanted to make sure that these went along smoothly. At this point, there's a lot of celebration today, but there's also an acknowledgement that a long road lays ahead for achieving a fully democratic Hong Kong, and there's no consensus at the moment about what their next step will be. Some propose large protests over the coming weekends. Others say they should give the government an ultimatum to wait for them to act upon the results of this election, of this mandate, and see if they perform and respond to the people's will. And if they don't, we may see even more and bigger protests in the future.
All right, Ryan Kilpatrick, thanks very much indeed for joining us with the latest there and what we can expect in Hong Kong in the days to come.